Okay, you're not gonna. Wow, we gotta start over. Let's just keep going. You're definitely not gonna want to miss this one. I'm obviously at a stop for words, so tune in.
Speechless. This woman is speechless. So what we're doing today is going through the good signs. So all the things that you need to know from the last four letters, everything that we've talked about was shared in the last four letters, and it's what you need to know and the takeaways from that. Period. Enjoy it.
And some really good takeaways. So enjoy it.
Hey everyone, it's Chris.
And Kirsten.
Welcome to Good Thinking Weekly, the podcast where we discuss the best of the best in brands, marketing, and culture.
Thousands of people, top execs from the likes of Complex, Klaviyo, Walmart, Wall Street Journal, and LVMH tune in every single week.
We run a creative consultancy in GoodCo, so we know what it takes to build a good brand.
Subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast app, and Good Thinking on Substack for more.
All right, let's dive in.
Welcome to Good Thinking.
Hello, hello. All right. Back to the regular old programming that's not ever the regular old programming. Is that the plan?
Yeah, that's where we are. So we are both in our places of home. We are not traveling, and we are doing a best of the past month's newsletters.
Yeah, which I've been calling. So the last one of these I called Good Signs. And I think I want to preface this by saying, to me, these aren't trends. I think there's a lot of trends roundup, oh, this is a trend, da 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 da. No, this is what is happening in the newsletter over the last 4 months. These are some themes in the newsletter that are happening. And I think that that's more valuable actually than saying, oh, it's a trend, because it's something that you can act on right now. A trend is something I think, to be honest, I've been thinking a lot, trends are something that don't really exist anymore. In the big, way that trends have been done historically, as the pace of things, and we'll bring it up in one of these, but the pace of things is just, it's not feasible to do trends. I think you have to pick and choose what kinds of trends, where you fit in the trend spectrum. Are you a fast brand? Are you a slow brand? And these are themes, and I think you should take away from them how fast and how quickly you move on them is for your own brand to decide.
For sure. Yeah. I think we can debate the trend thing a bit, but probably for another episode. I think it's really helpful for brands, for CMOs, for CEOs to really see, hey, here's some things that we're seeing, here's some movements, here's some things that are truly actionable of here's how your brand can kind of dig in. Yeah. All right. Shall we start? Shall we dive in?
Let's dive in, as I always say.
All right. Giving generosity a go.
Yeah. So, and like I said, this is coming off of 4 emails. So 4 kind of weeks worth of content. And one thing that was really bubbling up for me is, at least for the things that were resonating for me, but also the things I'm seeing resonating with people online through communities, whether that's LinkedIn or Instagram, or people sharing it with me, which I get a lot now, which is lovely. Please keep doing that. But is that brands are kind of shifting, or brands that are doing well are shifting from how can we extract from a consumer? Let's take something from them, their money, their time, their energy, their, all the things, and how can we reframe and actually give them something of purpose, of value? And this isn't a purpose. I just want to preface this by saying, this is not about the purpose economy for me. This is about viewing yourself as somebody who adds, or a brand that adds value to somebody's life. That is the purpose. I think bigger, if you picture a bigger business, I hope that most brands see that they should be adding value, whether you add value through nutrition or you add value through entertainment. What is the value you're adding to people's lives? This should be central to what you're doing. So
for sure.
That's what's happening.
For sure.
I'm seeing a lot of that kind of bubbling up through many of the examples that are kind of resonating. And so those examples, and we can kind of talk through them pretty quickly, but I'll list them off just so we can chat about them, because I know you'll know what they are.
One thing to dig into before the examples, I think it's important to kind of, to your point, going back to that, it's not the purpose economy. And I think the difference that I see about this is I think we all know, give before you get, right? I think that obviously for me tends to go a bit woo woo, and I could continue on that a whole long way. But when you think about LinkedIn, when you think about, you know, what you want to do in the world. Like it's about giving first and then really figuring out like that stuff will happen if you start from that place. And I think brands have always thought that they're adding value. I think that's, ask any brand, I think whether or not they were, I think that's what they think that they're doing in the world. I think the difference that you're picking up on, the difference that we're seeing is like there's specifics of like not just adding value, but like physically giving you something, right? In all of the examples.
Yeah, not just physically giving you something. I guess probably to me, it's about utility, right? Like it's about seeing like how can you fit into this moment in time and be useful, be additive versus like extracting, right? Like be more additive in your mindset. I think that's probably where I'm going.
Yeah, useful is the great. Perfect. Okay. All right, let's break them down.
All right. So the first example I have, and this was one from I think the latest newsletter, was the Bold Bean Company giving away beans after Glastonbury at the train station. And I love this concept because you could, even if you haven't been to Glastonbury, you've been to a festival, hopefully. If you haven't, stop everything, turn this off and go to a festival.
Grab some boots and go.
Right, just turn off your podcast. We need to fix something first. Okay, so you can picture yourself coming back. You've been sleeping in a tent. Like, this is my worst nightmare I'm about to describe. You're sleeping in a tent. You've, peed in a stall. You peed on the ground. Like, you're tired. You're hungry. You haven't had anything more than dip to eat. You've made 1,000 new friends. Yes, Krista would see it
You're
as friends.
And I'm like,
yes. You've eaten things on a stick that shouldn't be on a stick. And it's just, and you're muddy and you're tired. For Glastonbury, like as opposed to, but you can picture in the US, you'd be coming home in your car. But the difference is that when you're driving in your car, you see a McDonald's at the side of the road, they might be to your rescue. But when you're on a train, there's very little coming to your rescue, right? Like those late night trains, everything's closed. Like there's barely a vending machine to be had. And you're coming into this train station and it's the big train station before you go to your personal train station that's taking you home. And they were there with cans of baked beans. Everybody, baked beans, for those who don't know English culture, like having beans on toast for dinner is like the equivalent of like a PB&J. Like it's like an emergency meal that like everybody is like, it's like your comfort food. It's what you grew up eating. You probably had it with cheddar on top. Like it's a vibe. And I ate beans on toast probably like once a week for almost my whole childhood and the entirety of my mother's third pregnancy.
Thanks, Matt.
So very familiar with this concept. And, people were coming off the train and like crying, seeing this brand. Like it's a small brand. And like, they were like, here's some free beans. Like now you have dinner, you're going to go heat it up. It's going to take 3 seconds. You're going to like have a delicious, nourishing meal. And you're going to be on your way and the world will sort of feel right again. And that because it's like giving somebody a comfort food that is so familiar. And that's what I think, like that energy, like you can interpret that however you want to your brand, right? Like the next example I have is Gymshark going to Hyrox, which if you don't know what Hyrox is like the new version of Tough Mudder. There's no mud. It's all like kind of contained, but I've written about it many times. But if you don't know what it is, go look it up. That's what it is. And Gymshark came to the Hyrox and like Hyrox finishing is like, it's epic. Like finishing that is a completion of an enormous, it's like finishing a triathlon, right? Like it's just a huge event in your life. Usually you don't do more than one, although many people do. They become addicted to them.
About my brother, yeah.
Yeah. But like getting your patch and finishing is a huge accomplishment. And Gymshark kind of came and they said, hey, like we'll not only like take your dirty outfit and dry clean it for you, but we'll sew on your patch for you, which like to sew on a patch and do all that and do it well. And like, that's a task in and of itself. Right. And so to take that and like take that away and then also make a celebration of something, like that's such a beautiful way of participating in an event like that.
Yeah. I mean, that one for me, like the beans feel like not obvious, but like feel really connected. And like, I get that. And like, seems like a perfect fit. Right. The Gymshark thing almost like brings me to tears in the idea of they could have just been like, okay, well, this is cool. Hyrox is something that's happening. We want to be there. We're going to give away a thing. we're going to give away a headband. We're going to give away. And they really like saw and felt what would be emotionally really meaningful for these people. And they really tapped into that. And that is fucking beautiful.
You know, okay. So then I'm going to give you some examples that are maybe not going to make you cry. But like, I think, you know, there's a spectrum of this.
Yep,
and there
I'm
should
here for
always
it.
be a spectrum. So another one I used is IKEA's new line, Basingen. Like, who knows?
I mean, you always have to pronounce
Basingen.
it like, you know, pretty
You have to,
Hergenschneider.
yeah. But anyway, this line is a beautifully designed line of, yes, grab bars and step stools. And I think that like pretty obviously geared towards silvers and like making their house more functional, but they actually show the photography like with kids, with families, like it's really well done. And to me, that's like saying, hey, like here's a way that we can like add value. IKEA, the person that like owns the home, here's a way that we can add value to a community that is generally like kind of just forgotten or given like just medical goods, right? Like it's just like, oh, you reach this age, you get nothing cool. Like that everything like comes from the pharmacy. And
It's all white and plastic.
Yeah, and I think of it as like a really like kind of like it's utility wrapped in like generosity and utility like all wrapped together, right? Like it's really like seeing it and not just doing it. And that's why I didn't want to use the word utility, because they could have just made like a very functional grab bar, right? But they did it generously by like looking at that community and like thinking about how they're doing it and doing it really thoughtfully. And that's why I felt like the word generosity was like maybe slightly better. But another example, not going to make you cry, Zara travel mode.
But I'm super interested in this.
Yeah, so like Zara travel mode is something that so yes, it's like they have like kind of like it's for certain cities. So I think it's maybe like 3 or 4 cities at the moment, like maybe Paris, Milan, and a couple of others in Asia. And you can essentially like this, there's 2 components to kind of it. One of them is that when you go to that city, you can say, hey, I'm in this city visiting. I want to buy things, as like Kirsten has done like a gazillion times in our lives. And normally it's because you're like panic buying, like you're like, it's hot, I'm at Cannes, like I need a hat, like da, da, da.
All true.
And you can essentially tell it, you know, and this doesn't sound revolutionary, but it's actually hard to do. Like you can just tell it like, I'm on vacation, use your account, and like just put in where your hotel is. But then it will also give you like travel tips for where you are. So it'll be like, oh, while you're shopping for a hat in Milan, you should also go to this coffee shop and like this place and this place. And like, I think that's really seeing like how you can be useful in somebody's life, right? Like, and it's quite, it's being thoughtful, and I really enjoy that from them, because they don't need to do that.
No, and I'm super interested to see where this goes. I mean, when I first heard travel mode, like the only apps I know that do travel mode are dating apps, and they definitely do that.
Of course,
that's obviously where my mind went. But I think, you know, it's like going down the line, like, are we going to see a Zara/Amigo collaboration? You know, like, where is Zara going to create its own thing? Like, I think it's really interesting, because we know how valuable all of this is, the shopping, the, you know, Amigo, and really having very curated, edited. I'm lucky enough to get an edited, curated Amigo version, but I think it's really valuable for everybody. So I'm super curious to see like where this is going to expand into.
Yeah. And then I think that the last example that I kind of threw in here, and it's maybe more of a kind of like a out there example, but bear with me, is Hinge's $100 a month stipend for staff to go on dates. And then they also, on the flip side of the consumer side, have this thing called your turn limits. And it's a feature that's basically like, if you don't reply or you ghost like replies, then you can no longer communicate with new people. And the idea is like, this is happening to people all the time. People are just getting ghosted. People are not getting replies, and or even just saying like, I'm not interested. And it's saying, hey, like people deserve the you know, the benefit of like you saying no thanks. And I think that is like probably falls more into the utility part, but I do think when the staff one falls into the generosity part of like, it's not generous to the staff to give them $100, but it's generous to the consumer to have staff who have gone through their situation and who can see their world, like what they're going through, and then they're building product based on that. Like that I think is quite
Yeah.
an advanced way of thinking.
100%, 100%. And that almost takes me back to like the more, which hopefully is just integrated into brands now, the more purposeful, purpose-driven things, because I think both the staff and again, it's how the brand is thinking about themselves and thinking about the customer and thinking about the experience and investing, saying that they're willing to invest in their team so that they have the right perspective, they have empathy, they have experience within that. Just that statement alone is huge to me. And then I think that your turn limits is actually quite important because I think they're trying to shape dating culture. Because mind you, these will have been people that have matched, right? It's not people that haven't matched. So you're already in a conversation with them. So I think they're trying to change dating culture, which I think is rad. I think that's great. And I think both of those are really meaningful and impressive. And it definitely, like where my head goes, it would be really interesting. There's such an opportunity to do this for, like any brand can do this, right? Any brand can really say like, okay, how can I really be generous and what's my give and what's that experience? Like what needs to be better? I think, it's like would love to do for many brands out there, like do a workshop where it's really like going in and identifying, okay, here are all of the ways that you can be generous. Here's, what your customer is really needing and kind of opportunities to match those up.
Yeah. And I think this was always my plight or my like bother with the whole purpose economy in general is that like everyone's, because if it were the purpose economy, it would be like, oh, like Hinge gives $100,000 to people who, have been stilted at the aisle, people who, like women who've never dated before, like it would be like a sub story. Obviously those are jokes, but like something that very serious that I wouldn't probably want to make a joke about. But like it's like that would have been the old purpose economy. And to me, like this is the reinvention of that is like how do you add value, add utility, be generous with consumers? Because then in turn, I think they want to be, they feel like you are on their side and you are if you're behaving like this from a genuine perspective.
100%. And I think it really has the ability, as in Hinge's example, to really change culture, to really change, like maybe it's maybe it's dating culture, but I think they really can have a greater impact, which again ties back to the purpose economy, quote unquote. All right.
And then I have a pendulum swinging in each of these, and we won't spend too long on them because they're deliberately the pendulum swing. So I'll just put like kind of rest my case with these. But
give it to us.
Is the pendulum swing, and just to be clear, like the pendulum swing is not a negative view. It's not like on the other side of this is these like assholes. It's just like on the other side of this is something else that people want and something else that people are desiring and needing and craving. And I think on the other side of this is just saying like, hey, like, I want something indulgent. I want something that I don't have to like pretend is good for me. I want something that's like just like fuck it, like let's go. And I would say the examples in the letters of the last 4 weeks have been the Pan Am experience is like $60K, you go to like 10 amazing destinations. Like it's
who doesn't
like
want to do that?
Private jets, like, pure opulence, like just like, let's do it. Then there's the Xenon assisted Everest climbs that I have in there. And like those are like basically like fast climbs to the top of Everest. Like I want that picture. I want to have done it. I want to say I would do it. Like, you don't need to take 4 months off to like train and like do the whole thing over 2 weeks. Like, let's just go. It's like envy in a bottle. And you still can like go pay your bills and like have a job, which is difficult to do if you're climbing Everest the traditional way, unless you're a billionaire, and then great for you. Then there's Ritz-Carlton Luminera yacht, which like obviously don't call a cruise, but like is somewhat a cruise, like just a really bougie cruise. But like they had like this enormous influencer trip that was just full of celebrities go on this cruise to launch it. And like, it's not trying to be anything it's not. And I actually really appreciate that. Capital One's 45-minute cheese tasting that my husband was like, can we sign up for this? Like, how do we go? Like, tell us more. If you know us and you want to invite us for a 45-minute cheese tasting, you have two very enthusiastic people who will show up early for such an event. But, like what I will say, what I think of that is like, I do think that's an interesting offering, but I do think I'm picturing like the future of travel lounges to have like immortal loungers, like red light, like it's just going to be over the top and like full of wellness things. I think that's really the future. I don't think the future is a 45-minute cheese tasting, but it's a start.
Yeah. And as somebody who spent the weekend in airports eating a lot of cheese and too much cheese, I'm going to tend to agree with that.
I mean, cheese is the only acceptable meal to have in an airport. So there is
100%. But I had, I flew out and then flew it. Like, that's all I had
and
other
you
than
just,
that quesadilla,
if you're in
which
an
also
airport
has
for
cheese.
48 hours, you're only going to eat cheese and it's going to
Yes.
hurt. All right.
All right.
We're going to go through these more quickly because I know everybody wants this to be an hour because that's the only sane length of time for a podcast. All right.
Real issues.
So I'm calling it
Give it
real
to us.
issues, but is it trust issues? Like, who knows? That sounded too negative, so I changed it. But really, like, I think a trust is coming up as an enormous theme in a lot of the letters. And that's because I think of AI. Like it's what's happening. Like people don't know what to trust. The world is crumbling. They don't know who. Like the government institutions are falling apart. Like all the norms. Like
check.
Nobody trusts your doctor anymore. Like everything is kind of crumbling. And I think that one of the things that's coming up here is like also a lot of people having their trust like I think that's really interesting. So I use the example of like there's this big influencer called Baby Tamago, and she went on a Kerrygold, which is a butter brand influencer trip, as you do. And she was very specific in this interview that I saw where she said like, I was not paid to go on this trip. She might have received the trip for free, right? Like she wasn't paid to be there. And she wasn't paid to say what she was told, like what she ended up saying. And I think that's an enormous thing that's starting to bubble up with influencers is like it's beginning to it's not worth it to influencers to have their trust questioned for a brand. So they're saying, hey, like I'll do things, but I'm not going to like necessarily like just take the bag and run. And I think that's something that's like kind of bubbling up and it's interesting. Similar to that is Emily Sundberg. She was like accused. I think it was like a couple people. It was such a big deal. But I just noticed it. It was like somebody was like, oh, were you paid to write about the J. Crew trip? And she was like, absolutely not. Like I would never, ever do that. And so many Substacks, like I will say, like they feed you the PR line. Like that's what they do. Like I get the PR lines sent to me. I know what they read. Like I know that they're there. And I know that she doesn't do that, right? But I should know that based on her. And it's really important to her that is true. But I think one of the things that's bigger picture is like so many of the bigger media institutions are owned by big, Jeff Bezos and like all of these big companies, and they don't have editorial independence. And like this new group of like basically like stewards are coming up and saying, I have editorial independence and I'm not giving it to you. Like that is truly the sort of the piece of gold that they have. And if they give it away, they lose everything.
Right. But I think that's really important because we had a big conversation about this. You were quite passionate about this when we were in England, right? And we had a really good conversation about it because I think this is not AI related. I think it's about kind of the wave of, next influencers, right? Which I would say are Substackers, you and, all the people that you're referencing, kind of almost seeing where influencers have come from and like, no thanks, right? Like and then also the mix of like editorial, really like you're in it and your talents and what you're bringing to the table is a point of view, is your writing. And so really wanting to me, keep that really above bar, like a really kind of pure and true to who you are, but then also seeing how easily, an influencer can kind of just sell out and be gone and not be as meaningful. To me, it's kind of related to that versus necessarily AI, which I think a lot of the other things are certainly impacted by. But I think it's a really important thing to note. And I wasn't aware to the degree that like there's so many out there on all the socials that are just like, here's the PR line, here it is. You too can be a writer when it's not really.
It's not to say that PR companies shouldn't pitch, and it's not to say that there's value to some of these places. Like I get information from some of these sources too. It's like, what's happening in the world, but it's more like what's happening in the world. And it's not a perspective. And I think that there is kind of two camps. And I think there's the people who have true perspective and there's the people who are regurgitating a perspective. And I would never regurgitate a perspective and like, there's no value to me doing that. Like it would just hurt my soul, and it would also like not add. I don't think people would get it. Like they would be obvious. So you can keep pitching me, obviously. Please do. I love it. Like come tell me what you're up to. It's a great way to get on my radar. But it's also, it's never a promise on this one. And I think for a lot of people, like Emily, is also never a promise. Like if she's interested, she'll write about it. If she's not, she doesn't, or she'll just write her own perspective on it. Like I always write my own perspective and I never shit on anyone. That's my rule.
Yeah. Which I love. All right, keep us going.
All right, keep going. So quick examples of this in very different ways. So I loved the new Adidas She Breaks Barriers documentary that was shot by a friend of a footballer or soccer player, if we want to. And it was shot by her childhood friend that had grown up with her since she was 4. And it was just like this very honest view of like, you would never be able to see an athlete from that perspective, like a superstar. And in a way, like she didn't present her like glossy, like, oh, she's like amazing, you know, like she's like, this is like, she's struggled. She's can be an asshole when she's stressed, you know, like she presented this very honest view that only a friend could ever really tell it lovingly. And I really think that that's another thing that's like, it's a thing of trust or realness. Dr. Squatch got acquired like $1 billion plus.
Hudson's favorite brand.
I'm deeply worried for them. You know, I think what they made their bones on is sort of the give no Fs, like let's do it, like let's have fun, let's say whatever we want. Don't know how that's going to go with them, like for them with Unilever, but like let's hope for the best. Fanatic Fest is another one. So I wrote about Fanatic Fest twice, which is like truly like a testament to them. I was really interested in the sort of 3 layers of there was business. So there's athlete in the center, then there's like business operatives, and then there's fans. And there was like this really like interesting intermingling of them and adding kind of the closeness of that. Like these athletes get to meet these business people very close on, and get advice, but then fans get to meet athletes and play with athletes, like that you're not sitting in the stadium anymore. You're not sitting in the seats, like such an interesting sort of closeness, you know, realness, trust, even just trust that you're not going to, you know, be a lunatic, which so, you know, to this day, like I always, yeah, well, sports fans are, but then you're also not trusted to not be, right? Like you're always held at a distance. And this is very much like letting people get as close as humanly possible. I'm sure it makes the security teams very nervous, but like I think it's cool. Then McDonald's social media manager breaking the fourth wall. Like so many people that asked for this product to come back, and they'd ask and they'd ask and they'd ask. And the social media manager on X was like, "You did it, guys! Like you were the reason that did it." And celebrating that versus saying like, oh, we're doing, you know, like behind the screens. And I think that's again, like a realness and a truth. And then my favorite one of the whole bunch, obviously, of Steve Madden just like coming on that podcast and just being like, I'm going to speak my mind, you know, and just say whatever it is that I feel like saying. And there was zero, I'm sure that he's been media trained or somebody has desperately tried. And I think he just doesn't care. And I think, or doesn't care anymore. And I think that that's what, you know, like media training does not get you 60% increase in Google searches, you know, but honesty, rawness, realness, truth, that's what gets you those kinds of gains.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that resonates with me so much. And I think is a great kind of cap to this entire section. And I think, to me, that's really a movement. I think that's something that we're seeing, whether it's because of Next Gen. Another thing I watched on Hulu, just finished Alex Cooper's, not bio, but kind of on her tour, which is a little bit of a bio last night. And it was really good. And I think so much of her success is because she's fucking real. You know, I think you talk about, you know, the letter, we talk about the podcast. I think what is really resonating with people is we have opinions. We're real. We're not sugarcoating things. We're, you know, being positive and encouraging and trying to get things better, but like kind of saying how it is. And I think there is this realness that I think is something that's a movement, that is something that's happening in culture, that's happening with brands, it's happening with leaders. And I think people are really drawn to that.
Yeah. I would say also like in similar realness, like anytime we don't like something, I'll change my mind. Like if I see something you weren't great and you were great, like you were great and then you weren't, like I'll tell you, and like who cares? So the pendulum swing to that is, you know, the AI fever dream, everything AI created, the glossed up, blah, blah, blah. The Kalshi fever dream ad that I mentioned. So Kalshi is like this online betting service that you can kind of bet on anything. And they made this AI ad that's like very unhinged. It's very kind of entertaining, but it's cheap. But it got eyeballs, and like, it was cheap, and they didn't have a lot of money, although they did hire big agencies. So did they not have a lot of money? So like, but anyway, it worked. So good for them. And then I would say AI influencers, which, Gary Vee's talked about, Byron Stewart's talked about from like the perspective of like it being really like dangerously culturally appropriating. But, I think the reality is that's coming. Brands will own their own AI influencers. And there's a reason that they're going to want to own that. They own the IP, they own everything. I think you're just going to have to figure out like, where on the truth spectrum do you want to sit with that? So that'll be something to figure out.
Yes, indeed. All right. Keep us going. Mainstream rebellion.
Yeah. So this is, getting into one of the things that we were talking about. Institutions are crumbling. If you haven't heard, here is the notification.
Things are a little bit of a shit show out there.
Things are rejiggering themselves. Let's say that. I would rather take, it's not toxic positivity, but because I really do think that there are some shifts that are happening that can and will be for the good. I think that what is happening is that for a really long time, and obviously in the 50s, like you had even more of this, and like, we've slowly been kind of like questioning the gatekeepers of everything, right? And this has been happening for this story is as old as time. Like everybody questions the gatekeepers, and we are now questioning like very serious gatekeepers like medical institutions, medical degrees, higher education institutions. Like all of the things are coming up that it's like that people are questioning everything, for better or for worse. So the examples that I have here are Base 44, which was a business that was started, so inception to sale, 6 months, $80 million. Fastest $80 million. Fastest $1 million ever made, maybe. I mean, probably not if you're Bezos. I think the point is like, if you can make a business, like, the timeline for scaling a business is just like compressed in the last year in a way that we could never really have experienced in the last 10 years. Like, and I'm sure it felt like that when the internet like came up and it was like really like compressed. But this is like, we're compressing into months. And not only is it $80 million, but it's basically like 6 employees, like people are walking away like set. And I think that that's going to make everybody question like, do you need to go and get an MBA? Like, how are you going to do that? Are you going to go like create a business and you're going to go do a little bit of an MBA, then you're going to come out, then you're going to go think a little bit, like you're going to come at it, like refine yourself. Like the whole world is going to rejigger with this kind of ability, because with vibe coding, with the ability to create a business on the fly, you create it in your office, like 4 months later, you're a multimillionaire. Like it's just going to change everything. And I really don't think that people have really quite grasped how many levels of like institutional change will happen because of the speed of this. So I would say if you're not thinking about it, you should be. Other examples, different, very different. I have Athlos League in here, which is obviously an athlete-owned sports league. It's the running league that's owned by athletes. And I think that again is like, it's a really big cultural pivot, right? Like it used to be you were owned by basically a billionaire who owns a company that was probably owned by several other companies. And now it's like, oh no, like the people playing own it and then everybody else is feeding in. And that's just a really big questioning of an institution that wouldn't have happened a couple years ago. Right.
Give me two or three more on here that you feel like are
am I going too slow?
Full spectrum. Well, we can share the rest in the letter. There's a lot of great examples in here.
All right. Fair enough. That works for me. All right. I would say Texas, investing in psychedelics. They are investing in biogain, which is a African shrub. And if you told me that Texas was investing in psychedelics like 5 years ago, I would have like slapped you silly and just told you to go home and like stop drinking. Like, okay, or stop doing psychedelics. But here we are. And that's happening because of Maha, because of the desire. There's another example in here, which we don't need to go into, but it's like, it's the real questioning of the pharma industry. And that's a huge institution that's falling. I think it's interesting. Dishoom, Jacquemus. So Dishoom is starting a hotel. Dishoom is a restaurant that has like, very famous restaurant. very delicious restaurant in London, but they just started a very small boutique hotel. They clearly could have gone for a giant one. Jacquemus popped up at John Dow, which is it's a restaurant really in Ibiza. And I think it's a real questioning of like what makes like luxury prestige hospitality, because I think it was the Ritz-Carltons of the world, and now there's kind of this rejiggering of like actually what is that, and I think that's happening. And then
Right.
I
And
think
boutique, I think, is such a part of that.
I
The
think it's
boutique
not just
prestige.
boutique. It's not just boutique, because it's also like who holds the power, and it's like it's because there are a lot of boutique hotel brands that are really cool, but it's like it's also the people who are playing in the hospitality industry are changing, and like who controls different industries is changing. You know, like it's
Yeah.
not like, oh, you have to be in this industry in order to control the industry. Like it's like you can come
Right.
in and
Right.
be a
Totally. Yeah.
player.
Dishoom's a great example, but I think the Venn diagram of kind of being boutique, of being tastemaker, of doing something else that's
Oh,
impactful,
yeah.
and kind of seeing that, I'm here
Totally.
for.
And then the last one I would say is the destination dupes, which is 25% of Gen Z saying that destination dupes are cooler than the original. So like think Croatia to Italy, or I saw on there Liverpool to London. I'm still like not believing that one. But you know, like there's a lot of them, like Formentera, where I'm looking to go, versus Menorca. Like there's all sorts of like different things that it's like, where is kind of the alternative? And I think part of that is coming out of the institution of TikTok and the fatigue of like getting to these places and being like, oh my God, there's a 4-hour line for an ice cream. Like, no thanks.
Yeah. And just seeing people in front of you covering the beach that are just there to take selfies of themselves versus like enjoy the experience, that can also be overwhelming.
Yeah. And I think that's like, when I say institution, one thing that's interesting is TikTok is an institution, but it's not been around forever, right? But like once something becomes so big, then it begins to get questioned.
For sure. For sure. All right. And the swing?
The swing is really, you know, like maybe that there's an appetite for like brands evolving, right? So it's not such a pendulum swing in this particular case, but like a kind of a nudging. But like I use the example of like Pan Am's revival. Like people are willing to like watch you evolve. And what I liked about Pan Am specifically is they didn't say, hey, we're going to like do this bougie airline and like just be exactly the same thing we were today. They're like, what did it really mean to be us? And then how does it work today? And I think that that's really interesting. You know, remains to be seen if it's successful, but I do think it's interesting.
But
And
looking at it in that way versus like just a tweak or interpretation, I think is gold. Like really going back to, if we were to be today, what would it be?
Right. And so I have other examples in there, but I think that that's my favorite one.
All right.
Momentum
market.
Yes. Who said it first? So I've been thinking about this one a lot. And I think that, you know, like one of the things that's happening that I'm noticing, and I think everybody's noticing, and you could say like, oh, it's fandoms, it's this, it's that, but is that taste is moving faster than ever, and it's moving faster than strategy of a brand could ever move, right? Like taste and the way that taste is being created now is so different than how it was created even 3-4 years ago. Taste is no longer coming from an influencer, in my opinion. It's coming from the collective hive under which the niche influencer represents, right? So we've talked about this before, like niche influencers, just from the beginning. But then underneath a niche influencer lives this community that is cross-pollinating and talking to one another. And that's the fandom that people refer to, right? And what's happening there is like the hive is moving. Like it's just like doing its thing. And I think like one of the things that brands need to decide is like, do you want to be a part of the hive and move and create cool things and be fluid? And I think of Rode as like being able to like, they are able to like make products and like, they're not reinventing their product. They're just making a new flavor or making a new this version of it or a new scent. And like, but they're like fluidly moving with the hive. They're kind of in sync and like they're listening to the hive, they're watching the hive, they're part of the conversation, and they're just kind of like doing this all the time. You know, another way of looking at it is to not do that. And that's one of the things that I loved about that diagram that I shared by this woman. I want to say her Kat Oberg, something like that. Anyway, she made this amazing diagram of like, where do you sit on this spectrum of fast and slow? And there was like these different kinds of things. But the examples that I have, I think, get to kind of my point. So for a really long time, we were talking about collagen like all the time. Collagen, 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 collagen. And it was that message was coming from on high. It was like, oh, collagen makes your skin plump. Collagen will give you less wrinkles. And now the hive has gone, no, creatine, we're healing from within. We're perimenopausal. We're doing this. We're dudes working out. Like, and that has overtaken the whole collagen like thing. Like no one cares about that anymore. Like that's topical. We're on the inside. And that came from hive conversation. That came from women who had no answers looking for perimenopause advice. That came from like men working out and saying, I want to live a long time. I want longevity. I want this. That's the hive conversation. That is not a brand saying, hey, creatine. Now brands are having to like respond to it, right? But they weren't pushing it down people's throats. And that is the change that I think that so many of these represent, is like just a real movement of the hierarchy that I'm very fascinated by. I could go on. Do we have time?
So, I mean, you got probably one more. I think the bigger question that I have as far as like, okay, so what happens if you aren't being part of, because I think we all know, like, especially with AI and all the things that are happening, taste and brand, in my opinion, have never been more important. So what happens if you don't necessarily, if you're maybe more of a brand that wants to be iconic and is maybe a little bit more heritage that isn't necessarily following the hive? What does that look like and how does that work?
That's in the pendulum swing. So that's exactly why it exists, right? Is like there's still an appetite for that, if not a greater appetite for it, right? Like the hive is doing this and like you're like, oh, I don't really want to be part of the hive. And like a lot of people, not just brands, are also feeling that, right? Like they want slower options. They want, a more pared down closet. Like all of that is happening. And so I would say like I linked, Emily Sandberg had a really interesting thread where she was like, what does luxury hospitality really mean today? And like there's so much like grandiose things in hospitality, like we have these amenities and we have this person giving a class and we have this, and most people in that were saying, hey, Belmond, just the best service. Like when you go, they remember you. When you go, they like have the small touches you expect. They just do everything right. And I will say, like, one time I did stay in a Belmond, that's how I felt. But it's like a no noise, very nuanced take, and that is continuing to resonate. I'd say, Adidas had the Superstars, I think it's Superstars campaign with Samuel L. Jackson. And like, obviously he's institutional, this shoe's institutional, like the whole thing like just feels like great people telling great stories. Like what else is there not to love? And I would say like, the problem is if you can't figure out where you live on that spectrum, a la Vera Bradley, a la Drunk Elephant, is where things really go wrong, right? Like if you want to play in the hive, you got to go play in the hive. And if you want to be over here being institutional and like legacy brand and like doing that, you really also have to lean into that. And you can't just be like, oh, we're going to pop in here. That looks really delicious. Like, let's take from that. People are going to throw you out like you're yesterday's news. Right. The second you can't keep up.
Totally. And I think that's the really important takeaway is like, don't try to be both. You can't do both. And if you're trying to be with the hive, you got to be quick. You got to have timing. You got to have the team. Like you've really got to commit to it full fledged. And you got to be a brand that can do that versus really being iconic. Then you've got to stick to your laurels and really, say no to probably a lot of things that seem cool or fun or trendy of the moment. But I think it really is picking a camp. And I think there's almost never been a more important time for brands to really figure out who they are and where they are.
Right. Or where on the spectrum of the things of your priorities are. And I think that like there is something to like the consistency of knowing like you're either this or you're that. Like people want to know where you live. Like I really do believe that. All right. And then the very last one is my take on AI for this month, because that's how fast this is moving. So like, don't hold me to it. But, I think this is really like somewhat true to what I've been saying for a while, is that I really, a very positive view on, so every time I write about AI, people are kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe that AI is going to take away referees' jobs. Like, referees are, they understand sports better than anyone. And like, how could you ever replace the institution of, forget about it. It's happening. It's going to happen. One of the things that I loved about that particular example that I would say is the reason that I wrote about this as the trend, even though there weren't as many examples in here, because I think it is a really big one, is what's interesting about Owl AI is that they trained the refereeing. So it's trained on X Games, right? Which is like obviously a high intensity sport, but it's got a lot of art to the sport, right? It's not like you made the play, you didn't make the play. There's a lot of artistry to the X Games sports.
Totally.
And they trained it on the artistry.
Fascinating.
So that it could say like, yes, you actually did get the point, even though it was unexpected. That thing we saw through the artistry, still get the point, right? And one thing that I think is very fascinating about that is once AI is trained on the artistry, does it allow you to become more artistic? Because before you might have been playing it safe, thinking, how far can I push it before somebody's not going to see that actually I did stay within the rules? Right? Like I did do it, but I did it my own way. And before they couldn't see it. They couldn't see the angle of the board. They couldn't see this. They couldn't see the timing. They couldn't see that. And now, are you going to see a leveling up of people saying, hey, I'm going to become even more daring, even more artistic, seeing if it can push the AI, push the referee, push the referees, human referees that are still part of it to say, actually, no, like that's true artistry and they did get the point. And I would say to that end, in a similar way, like with all of these AI influencers coming in, and if you've watched them, it's so eerie. Like they're doing like get ready with me videos, right? And they're just like, it looks so real. It looks like exactly like a person that you know. If they're able to do that, you're not going to want to watch 1,000 other get ready with me videos because there's going to be 1,000 of them. You know, there's going to be 1,000,000 of them. So you're going to be forced to create better content, to create more interesting content, to create more value, to create more realness in order to not be perceived as this like get ready with me bot. So maybe like we're going to be pushed to be not just better, like, oh, we're powered by AI and we can work faster, better, but actually push our artistry to the top, push our humanness to the top of things and really ask like, if we can be better. That's an idea.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love the vision that AI could potentially raise the bar for, creativity. Like,
right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
here
for that.
Obviously,
for sure.
Obviously an optimistic view, but I do think humans are resilient and they have always shown, like, as, COVID showed us, like people really rise to the occasion typically. And I think that could happen now.
For sure. Yeah. And I love that. And I think, listen, this is happening and we've seen it happen in past generations, maybe not you, but certainly me, like with the music industry, right? Everybody's fighting it and Napster and all these. No. And then there's a gazillion companies and innovations and technologies that are coming out of it and being really successful. It's Netflix's ability to move the blockbuster model and become what they are today. It's like, are you innovating? It's happening. So stop saying no. Instead, like, how can you really jump in and make it right for you? And I love the idea of it really having some, huge opportunity to really push and support creativity and all the things we can be.
Yeah. And then I would say the flip side to that, and the very last thing is like, what can't the algorithm, like, or AI, if we want to call it that, grasp or reach? Like, and I think that's bespoke one-to-one gifts that you've handmade, that you like, brands can make it, your children can make it, like it's going to matter more. And then I would say it's probably like a lot of like off the record stuff, face-to-face memberships, like places where nothing gets told, nothing gets recorded, everything is behind closed doors. Like that's going to skyrocket.
Yes, that we're seeing in Wimbledon and my feed and Audi and all of the great things that brands are doing is pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. This was fun.
All right.
Hope you learned a lot. If you learned anything, drop it in the comment section or give us a little love, heart, whatever the things are that you are on every platform you're on.
Yep. Share it with somebody you know and let us know comments. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Ciao.
Till next time.
That was it for this episode of Good Thinking. Don't forget to tune in next week.
If you found this valuable, subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast app.
And don't forget to read on Substack for even more insights.
And if you really liked it, drop us a heart. We'd love to hear from you.
Ciao. Until next time.